Hi again and welcome back to Learning to Fly, the series where you'll discover how to develop learner autonomy for your classroom over a period of 21 weeks. We're already in week 9 and although you may be wondering when we're going to get started with the real independent learning, well, I hate to break it to you, but there's going to be no big dramatic change where your students are suddenly thrown into the deep end. That's not the way we're going about developing these skills. Basically because that would be a recipe for disaster. And in fact, we've already started building these skills. We started by introducing small tasks and routines that your students could do in the classroom. We then started to learn a bit more about our students and how they feel about different activities. This is important because it gets them thinking about what they enjoy, what they don't like, what they struggle with, and this will help them later on when they get to make more decisions about their learning. We also set up a feedback system. If you haven't seen video 4, go and watch it for a cute idea. We've also looked at ways of supporting students with decision making. And all of these things were the foundations for building the learner-centered classroom. Then in week 6, we started introducing a more learner-centered approach. We started by giving students materials and activities to interact with independently in groups without guidance as an introductory activity at the beginning of a lesson or unit. We then looked at encouraging students to ask questions and express their ideas, and finally, how to create stable conditions that will allow creativity and independence to flourish. Wow, that was a long intro. So, okay, it's time for this week's keyword, which is balance. How do we know how much freedom to give students? How many choices should we allow them to make? There's no right or wrong answer to these questions. In this series, we're aiming to take things slowly and gradually increase the amount of freedom that we give our students, but ultimately it will depend on the students. You may find that some classes do really well and thrive from this newfound independence, but others may struggle to stay grounded and really benefit from a more structured approach. If this is the case, you may want to dial the freedom back a bit or, and I think this is the better option, provide more structure and support. But what about when students make decisions that don't work out? Notice that I'm not using the word bad decisions here, because that kind of sounds like it's the student's fault in some kind of blame game. It can be tempting when things don't go as planned to decide that it's not worth trying an activity again. However, I want to encourage you to do exactly that. It's a cliche, but we learn from our mistakes, and so do our students. When our students have made a decision that maybe hasn't led to any learning or hasn't had the desired outcome, we need to discuss this with them. We can ask students to reflect on what went wrong and why, and we can give them prompts to help them if necessary. For example, imagine that you put learners in groups to write a story, like the example in the last video. You gave students some support, maybe a worksheet with questions to help them plan their story, and you reviewed relevant target language beforehand, so everything's okay. But at the end of the lesson, one group of students only has 3 sentences and they're all looking miserable and annoyed with each other. They're blaming each other for not completing the task. We need to try to find out what happened. We can look at their planning document with them and see if things went wrong there. We can ask them about their roles, whose job was it to write, who came up with the ideas, etc. The key is for the students to identify why they didn't manage to complete the task and then think about what they could do differently next time. This is a reflection task, and Reflection is a key aspect of successful independent learning. So back to our keyword balance. We need to find the right balance for our students, and not all the students in the same class might be ready for the same amount of freedom. In any case, it's always a good idea to balance learner-directed activities with some more explicit direct instruction and controlled activities. You might want to visualize a two-sided scale with blocks representing more traditional teacher-directed activities on one side and learner-led activities on the other. And the quantity on each side will depend on many factors: the age of your students, their maturity, their experience of independent learning, the curriculum, and of course your own experience and mindset. The aim would be to gradually move blocks from one side to the other. So now for an activity. This will help you get insight into how your students see the activities they do in class, as well as analysing the balance. You'll need some beans or buttons or anything else that you can easily find, but preferably not sweets, as students will just eat them. You'll also need paper cups and 2 bowls or jars. You could even maybe use scales like the ones that I mentioned before if you have them. At the beginning of the lesson, give each student a bunch of, let's say, beans for this example, and 2 paper cups. If you have a big class, maybe don't use paper cups because it's not very eco-friendly, but you could reuse old envelopes or something instead. During the lesson, have students place a bean in 1 cup every time they make a decision about something. In the other cup, they place a bean each time they think you, the teacher, decided something. At the end of the lesson, have them count how many beans are in each cup. Then you can add all of the beans up together and see what the balance is like from the whole class's point of view. And you might just be surprised by the results. It's helpful if you do this activity too at the same time, and then you can compare with maybe the averages that your students gave. And from there you can reevaluate the balance of activities. Finally, my tip for this week is not really related to the keyword, but I think it's important. Remember that you're experimenting with these new ways of teaching, and don't worry if you're struggling or if things don't seem to be going so well. It doesn't mean that you're a bad teacher. You're actually really brave for trying out new things and making the effort to change your teaching for the benefit of your students. So remember this, especially on those days when things don't go to plan. It's important to balance what we do in the classroom with our own well-being. And one final word, make sure you balance your workload. The idea behind this series is to provide small, manageable ideas that won't take much time to plan or implement. Do let me know how you're getting on and what the balance is like. Is it working for you? Pop a comment down below, and I'll see you next week.